Hello, welcome to the Career Discovery podcast. On the show today, we'll be learning about our guests' area of expertise, their career journey, and what they wish they'd known when they were just starting out. Thanks so much for watching. We really hope you enjoy the show. Edith, hello, welcome to the show.
Hey Joe, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, yeah. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to learning more about your career area of expertise and your journey and any advice you may have to share. So thank you so much in advance. All right. How about we get started with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how long you've been doing it for?
Sure. So I am the Director of Education for a non-profit based in New York. I've been at the organisation for about 7 years now, and I manage all of our education programmes in the US, and I do all the administration related to that. I actually work from home, so I'm based in DC. But I travel to New York fairly often to work on some in-person education programs that are based both in New York and, throughout the US at different places. I came to the role from the UK. Obviously, I'm from the UK, as you can tell from my accent, from a similar role from a charity based in the UK. So it was quite a lot of transferable skills that I brought with me in order to do the job that I'm doing now.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're recording a podcast or a video podcast. So before we get into it, I'd love to know what podcasts you're listening to right now.
I'm listening to a lot of true crime, which I don't know if I want to admit. But typically, those are my go-to podcasts. I have a lot on the go at the moment, so I shan't bore you with all the names. But yeah, true crime is my podcast of choice.
There's nothing wrong with a bit of true crime. I'm obsessed with the missing crypto queen at the moment, which is a really good one.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one. That sounds great.
Yeah, check it out. Okay. All right, Edith, often there's misconceptions about what we do in our roles. So tell us about the common misconceptions of your role. What do friends and family or people outside of your industry think you do all day?
I honestly think they don't know. So my job is kind of a strange one because it's both education and working for a non-profit. So when you think of working for a non-profit, you think of raising money and doing events and fundraising. That's not what I do at all. While we're a non-profit, we raise money. I don't raise money. There's a whole department that raises money for us to run education programs. So my role is to administer those education programs. And by that, I mean to sort out the logistics for them, hire the instructors, hire the TAs, organise the budget, plan, strategise for the next upcoming year, what education programmes we're going to run. The non-profit I work for is called the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art, and it's an architecture-based charity which teaches people about timeless and classical ways to build. A lot of universities in the US do not really teach classical architecture anymore. So it's a way for students, professionals, young people to learn about these things which they otherwise might not be able to. So back to your original question, people don't really know what I do.
Hence this podcast, to raise awareness of those professions. Okay, so
that's right.
Can you tell us a bit about, I guess, it'd just be helpful, I think, for us to have an overview of the non-profit industry, perhaps pertaining to education, for those of us who aren't so familiar with that, if you could share an overview there.
Well, I think it's probably not different, but in the UK and the US, you call it a non-profit in the US, you call it a charity in the UK. And I guess if I'm thinking about the UK, you have many charities that, like, for example, the Prince's Trust, which they raise money to be able to engage young people and educate them in ways that perhaps they hadn't been able to at school or in community college. So that's the kind of education I'm talking about. The education that we do in my role is more for professionals or undergrads and young people, but it's the same kind of concept, that you raise money to educate people in a way that they haven't been able to through the regular routes that you would ordinarily be trained. So if you're looking, as I said earlier, if you're looking to study architecture at university, for example, you might not know that a particular school or a particular class doesn't teach you about classical architecture. So while you're studying that at university, and in the US it's very expensive to go to university, you're doing that on one hand, but you want to get this other input from somewhere else, and that's where we come in. I'm not saying that all of our education programs are free, because they're not. But for people who need scholarships and for people who want to be educated in a different way, then that's where we come in.
Yeah. Okay. So it's almost like a complementary offering to what might already be available for current students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And just out of curiosity, why isn't it something that forms part of the curriculum in the US?
Because classical architecture fell out of fashion, I think, many years ago. And people are more interested in modern ways of building. And it wasn't sort of fashionable anymore. But the time-tested principles of classical architecture are still very, very relevant today. So while you might not learn it at some schools, it's certainly a good foundation to building a career as an architect in future years.
Yeah. And if in a UK course, for example, would they have it as part of their curriculum?
Very few universities in the UK offer classical architecture as a pathway of study. So you would probably have to go somewhere else to learn about it as well. There's one university I can think of that has it as part of their curriculum in the UK. But otherwise you'd be hard pushed to find where to study it. I mean, we don't just offer classes for university level students. We also offer classes for professionals and middle school and secondary school students as well, but all in the US.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And I guess perhaps this is more of the why of the organisation or the non-profit. But for those of us that aren't so familiar, why is it so important that we, keep training people in these skills?
Well, I think there's something to be said with having a broad knowledge of your subject area. I don't think you can focus on any one strand of a subject area. I think you have to understand everything in order to pick a path for your future career, essentially. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that if somebody comes to one of the education programs to learn these new skills, they might not just be, I guess, designing those kinds of buildings, but they might be able to incorporate those skills and lessons into other work that they're doing. Is that
exactly.
I understand that right?
Yeah, it's like, as you said, Jo, you said it's like a complementary offering. That's exactly what it is. For people who want, additional knowledge in the field of architecture, I suppose. Yeah. But this, what I do as Director of Education can be applied to any role. My skill set is not, I didn't study architecture. My skill set is not an architect. my skill set is essentially management of people, high level administration and strategy. That's my skill set, and that can be applied to any role. It doesn't have to be in the field that I am in. It's just I'm in that field because it's a passion of mine. And while I'm not an architect, I have the skills that I can work in the field, but not be so specific in what I do.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's a really good point, that if you have a set of transferable skills, you can apply those across multiple sectors, non-profit, private, but also you can apply them to areas that you are passionate about, which is fantastic. Thank you. Yeah,
I think that's the key. So the skills, and I didn't necessarily know this until I was like 35, but the key to the skills that I have is that, as you say, they're transferable. So I could work in a different field, as you say, private sector, non-profits, education, and use those skills for something I'm passionate about, but still have that same kind of role, but just in a different organisation with a different education programs or whatever it is that I'd be managing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And so your organisation rely on you to design and deliver these programs. Yeah.
Exactly right. So well, sort of right. I don't really design them. So we have, while I'm the Director of Education, we have experts in the field who are at committee oversight level. So that committee oversight designs the programs we're going to run, and I execute them. With a team of people, execute them. So I make sure that we're strategically on track. I make sure that the programs that we're running are both fundable and not going over budget. I make sure that the logistics are correct and that we make sure that everything is running on time, those kind of things. So it's...
well, it sounds like a massive project management.
Essentially it is project management.
Yeah, large scale project management, and the project in this case is educational programs. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And I never, I come from a family of teachers and educators, and I never really wanted to be a teacher. So this kind of combines both, because I love working with young people and kids. Yeah. So this combines both my passion for architecture, working with young people, but I'm not actually a teacher. I'm just managing the programs that they're in. So I get to see the kids and I get to work with them, but I'm not teaching them. I'm like managing at a higher level what it is that they're going to be learning.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Almost like I suppose you could compare it to a headmaster or a headmistress at a school, for example.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, thank you. Okay, so zooming in to an average day or week, what activities would we find you doing?
So I think if we zoom into an average day, well, it depends, because I'll give you two examples. So if you zoom into an average day when I am in situ managing an education program, I could be anywhere in the US or the world, in fact, because we have programs internationally as well. So you might find me in Colorado at the University of Colorado, Denver, managing a workshop with 50 students. So making sure the instructors know where they're supposed to be, making sure everything's correct with the PowerPoint, making sure the students have all the materials. So that could be one thing. Or you could find me in Rome on our international drawing tour, which we've had for a number of years. Actually, this year was Edinburgh, and next year is Venice. But, previously you could find me in Rome, walking around the streets with 16 students, making sure they're keeping up with the instructor. They know what they're doing. They're in the right place at the right time. all those kind of logistical aspects.
Yeah.
Or more commonly, on a day-to-day basis, you'll find me working from home at my computer in our spare room, going over the upcoming programs that we have, making sure we have instructors and teaching assistants assigned to their correct roles, making sure I might be working on the budget, I might be on a phone call to some of our board members or the oversight committee, confirming that, you know, our strategy for the coming year is all going well and that we have everything in place for all of our programs. It's a wide variety of different duties that I carry out, and no one day is the same, I would say. So while, you know, I'm on a program in various different parts of the US, it could be very different to when I'm sitting at home or when I'm in the New York office. So I go to the New York office once a month or 2 times a month, which I love doing because I get to see my colleagues and I get to have you know, face-to-face interaction with them. But it's no one day is the same.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So it's a really nice mixture of, it sounds to me like it's a really nice mixture of desk-based work, off the desk, interacting with internal and external stakeholders to build these great programs. And then when the programs are actually happening, being there to ensure everything is running smoothly and so on. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it's really, I mean, I love what I do and I love my job. I love the travel. It's not too much travel that it becomes burdensome. It's just the right amount. You get to see different places in the US. And I'm not just talking specifically to this role. I'm sure there's many, many other roles which have a similar skill set that you would have, and you could, work. I'm sure there are plenty of jobs like that in the UK as well. So it's very enjoyable and I love the planning. I love the interaction with various people, as you say, stakeholders, various people at different levels. You know, I might be speaking to a student one day, or I might be speaking to, you know, a high level donor the next day, which I love. So it requires these skill sets to be able to not necessarily manage people, but be able to speak to lots of people at different levels. So it's a role for someone that enjoys that social interaction and can be confident about working with and speaking to lots of different people.
Yeah. I think being able to engage across a range of people, it sounds really key in that role. Okay. So what about if we think about, and you've already alluded to some really great ones, but if we think about activities that you might be doing on a less frequent basis, so maybe, you know, just less frequent. And the reason I ask the question like this is otherwise I worry people will be tempted to tell me only the exciting things. So, and you have told us some exciting things, but what else could you tell us about, you know, what else your role involves that isn't so typical?
So, something you might find me doing is attending board meetings. So that's less typical because it's, you know, it happens every few months, every quarter or something. And that involves, you know, making a presentation, making a PowerPoint and standing up in front of a big group, you know, 40 very high level executives in a library or in a classroom and making a presentation. So it's nerve-wracking, but you know, you get used to it and you practice and you make sure you get it right. And that comes with time. That it's not a skill, certainly not a skill that I had when I first started out, but it's a skill that you can develop over time and, you know, get good at. And as long as you have good notes, it's a valuable skill to have. So that's something I do less frequently. Also less frequently is quite a lot of work on budgeting. So I have to manage a large budget for the entire year. I have to set that budget in September of each year. And then I have to manage it throughout the following year to make sure we're not spending too much money. And that's quite stressful because, you know, if you go over budget, then there's no one to help you dig you out of that hole. You have to manage finances very, very carefully. You have to know how to say no to people, because obviously people want to do as many programs as possible, and it's quite difficult to. I mean, actually, I find it quite easy, but it's in theory quite difficult to say no. But it's not so problematic for me. But it could be tricky to have to spark up the courage to say no to people, and then that's another thing. And then what else do I do less frequently? I suppose the travel is not that frequent, maybe once or twice a month, so it's certainly not a day to day, but the travel is certainly something I enjoy, but that's less frequent, so it's not something that a lot of planning goes into a 2-day travel event, for example. So for every 2-day class or program that I'm running, it takes like a month's worth of planning, so it's it's a lot of planning for a short period of time.
Oh, fantastic. And I think I saw a lovely picture of you at a celebration a few years ago. Was that one of the fundraising events, or was that something else?
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, good point. I forgot about that. So we have an annual fundraiser each year where we all get dressed up and go to a fancy location, and essentially it's to raise money for the organisation. So that is something less frequently as well. And there are several of those throughout the year. We have one specific one for fundraising for the organisation, but there are several kind of events that I would go to in an evening to not only raise money, but also to raise awareness for the programme.
And
another thing as well is talking to donors. So that's not so frequent, but it is something that is required of my job to not necessarily to raise money, but just to tell them about our education program so they can make a decision about whether or not it's something they would like to support.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Edith. That all sounds amazing. Tell us what you love most about your role.
I think what I love most about my role is the people that I work with. And I know that's not specific to this role. So I'll give you another example as well. But for me, it's really important that the people you work with and the people you work for are on the same wavelength as you, and you can speak to them about concerns. You can laugh with them because then that makes the job enjoyable. So for me, that's one of the highlights of my job, is the people I work with, because they're incredible group of colleagues and friends that I work with, and that I would say is one of the highlights for me. Another, for the jobs specifically, another highlight is just having the autonomy to think about. I mean, I don't mean autonomy because we have oversight, but I mean I am able to think about programs that I think would be beneficial for the organisation, and I can present those to my boss and to our oversight committee, and they can say yes or no, or yes, that's great, but let's change it a little bit. So for me, that's really, really important, that I can have that level of engagement with the programs, that I can feel ownership of them, and I can say, this isn't working so well, how about we change it? Because I think that's really important. It's not just someone telling me what to do. I have agency in the programs, and I'm able to use my mind and develop things with oversight that I think might be good for the organisation.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it sounds as though as part of that, you're able to be part of the build and use your creativity. And I'm guessing that when you're with these students on the programme, I'm guessing there's a constant feedback loop around what they love, what they could use more of, and you can incorporate that into the ideas for next time round. So I can see why that would be great.
Yeah, and it's not just about doing the same thing again and again. It's about adapting to, what the industry wants, which I think is really important and really interesting in terms of, for me, in my role.
Yeah, great. What about the challenges of the work or the role? How would you talk about those?
I guess that one challenge is because we're a non-profit, or any non-profit is like this, you are guided somewhat by what the donor wants you to do. So I don't find it too much of a challenge, but I know that it can be in other non-profits, that the donor specifically wants one type of thing, but it's not necessarily the exact thing that the non-profit needs or the charity needs.
Yeah.
So I think that can be a challenge. I've worked in other non-profits where I think it's been more of an issue than for me now, but that's a challenge in finding a donor that's matched exactly to what it is that you or the organisation wants and needs to do. So you may have to tweak a programme because the donor wants something slightly different. So that can be a challenge. So you have to be adaptable. Yeah. You don't always get what you want. Yeah. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. A good lesson for life.
Yeah, right.
And when you if you think about the work that you've been doing there for the last several years, what's the thing you're most proud of?
I think I'm most proud. So I've been at the ICA for 7 years now. I'm most proud of how accessible we've made our programs. So the amount of scholarships that we have for students and people who can't afford to come on the programs otherwise. We have a really diverse teaching team now that we didn't have 7 years ago. So I think those two things are what I'm most proud of. And I think those are the things I really wanted to achieve when I came into the organisation 7 years ago. Classical architecture is often seen as very elitist, and I wanted to break down that barrier to try and help people to understand that that's not, or that shouldn't be the case. It's education is open to everyone and should be accessible to everyone. And I'm hoping by, what I and the team, and I certainly say just me, so I have an amazing team of people that work in the education department, have certainly made it more accessible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well done. That's great. Thank you. All right, Edith, I want to take you back to the beginning now as we pivot to your journey. Mm-hmm. So when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, to be honest, Jo, I didn't really know. So I knew, when I was a child, I wanted to be a sweet shop lady, but guess that didn't work out. So I think after that, which was obviously when I was about 5, and as I was going through school, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I had an interest in travel and other places, and I knew that I was socially aware and good with people, but I didn't know how that would translate into a full-time career. So I took a year out when I finished my A-levels, and I went teaching in Africa for a year, which was great, and I loved it. And so when I came back, I decided to do a degree in African Studies, which I very much enjoyed, and I did that at Birmingham University, but that didn't necessarily open my eyes anymore to what I could or should be doing as a career. So I think, to your question, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I was younger. I knew some things that I was good at, but I honestly didn't know how that would translate. And frankly, to the point of this podcast, I think my dad made me do a career guidance test thing, and it came out that I should be an army general in the army. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't really want to do that. What else can I do? And there wasn't really any indication of any other possibilities. So I didn't really have an idea about what I wanted to do. Yeah.
And I only laugh because we've known each other for some time, and I just don't see you in that role, Edith.
What, as an army major?
Yeah. And I mean, around this time, who were you talking to about ideas? You know, trying to connect those dots.
Well, no one. I think we had a career. No one. I think we had a careers person when I was doing my A levels, and I don't think that I have no idea what happened with that. And then I had this, independent careers guidance counsellor that my dad signed me up to, and that was useless. I still have the printout from that, which is quite a funny read, but no, it didn't really offer any guidance as to what I should be doing. So it was almost like a trial and error type thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know what I wanted to do, nor did I have a great deal of guidance, which is why I think this podcast is so great.
Yeah. Okay, so you did your year in Africa, and then you did African studies at Birmingham Uni. And what kind of course was that? What did it involve? Was it a mixture of theory and practice, or talk to us about that?
It was all, it was like history, culture, literature, all of those things. It was an arts-based course, so it wasn't, there was no sort of practical. I mean, I did go to Ghana for a few months as part of the programme, and as research for my dissertation, but it was more an arts-based programme, which I did really enjoy, but I didn't. I think a lot of people who did that degree went on to social policy and working for NGOs, non-governmental organisations. So I think that was the kind of career path for a lot of people. That certainly I wasn't up to scratch to be someone working in social policy. That certainly wouldn't have been my forte. But and the other, I wasn't so sure about the other kind of options aside from that. And frankly, when I finished university, I was a waitress for about 6 months, which I loved. And then I went travelling to Australia for, I think, about 6 months. So I saved up enough money to go, and then off I went. And I think I wasn't really ready to sort of settle down at that point. When I came back, I had a number of temp jobs in my hometown of Cambridge in the UK, and then decided it was time to move to London, as most of my friends had done, and got a temporary job at the Prince's Foundation in London, which is different from the Prince's Trust. It's not the Prince's Trust. The Prince's Foundation is the formerly the Prince of Wales's charity based in London about architecture and design. Yeah. So I got a job there as a temp for a few months, and then really enjoyed it. And they offered me a full-time position as, now I forget, as I think an administrative assistant to one of the directors there. And honestly, I really enjoyed it. And the work that I was doing was, I really enjoyed, because it was, a similar kind of role or similar subject matter to what I'm working with now. So it was about architecture, it was about young people. So I really enjoyed that. And then I worked my way up the organisation. I had a fantastic boss at the time who really took the time to nurture me and the talent that he saw. And I worked my way up through the organisation. And in doing that, they paid for me to get my MA in education and international development, which while I probably wouldn't have taken that step on my own, it was really important to have that extra layer of academia under my belt if I were going to be in a management position in the organisation. So I signed up for that at UCLA. UCL, sorry, I'm confusing it with a university in the US, UCL. And I did that part-time. So I did the MA part-time while I was working. The Princess Foundation supported me to do that. And they paid for or partially paid for the degree. And then they gave me time off to study. So that was 2 years, which very, very hard work. Yes. Especially when working, but I managed it. And then I got the MA and then felt, prior to that, I guess I'd felt a bit of imposter syndrome because I was at that point at this managerial level in this organisation where everyone around me had these academic credentials, which I didn't have. And while I was really good at my job and wouldn't have been promoted had I not been good at my job, I did feel a bit of an imposter because I was in this role, but I didn't have, I didn't have an MA or anything. So once I had that, I felt really good about where I was in the organisation, and then was promoted to director at the Princess Foundation. And I forget what your original question was, but I think I'm along the right line.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. So it sounds as though that was an amazing organisation to work for, in that you found something that you were passionate about. You joined as a temporary member of staff, but then were taken on, and then you worked your way up, which is a great way to learn an organisation and grow as you go, and that they sponsored that MA for you is fantastic. And so you when you sort of completed your time at the Princess Foundation, is that when you were in the similar role to the role that you're in now, as in Director of Education?
Right. Yeah. So my role at the Princess Foundation in the end was Director of Skills, and now I'm Director of Education, but for a different organisation. But I think what you say is, or at least I in terms of your listeners, I think that while I didn't have a career path in mind, I was a hard worker and I worked my way up. And I think that's often I think people maybe would, I don't know what it's like now, but there's so much focus on academia and, knowing what you want to do. And actually, because I didn't know, taking this path was actually really good for me. I didn't have to make a choice. I knew I was in an organisation. I really liked the content. I really liked what I was doing. And for me, it combined several things. And I guess I was lucky to get that temporary position so a bit of luck, falling into that role. But that's not to say that you can't make your own way in an organisation that you like. It's, certainly back then anyway, it was easy to get temporary positions because everyone was kind of doing that. But I don't know if that's the case anymore, but it was it's a good way of trying out different organizations and if you're not entirely sure what it is you want to be, because I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do, and that was a good way for me to establish what I wanted.
I think temping is brilliant because it's like you can try before you buy.
Exactly.
There was an element of luck because you tried it and you found something you could get really passionate about and you could see a career path for yourself. But if you hadn't, you might have tried another organisation and found it there. But I think it's just, sometimes I feel like there's a lot of pressure on the first job. But actually it is, I think, sometimes important just to start, and then you'll kind of figure it out along the way.
Right. And actually it wasn't the first job I'd temped at. I did a lot of other temping at different other roles in Cambridge and then London. So I did try before I buy. I didn't want a full-time job at those other places. But then, I did fall into this other job, which, luckily they had positions available and I was able to prove myself. And I think if you work hard and you establish yourself in that sense, I think that's a really good way to getting a position that you love and that you enjoy.
Agreed. And just touching on imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people struggle with, had you started to overcome that while you were, doing the MA, or was it once you'd got that rubber stamped that you felt like, right, okay, now I'm credible enough to not feel that way?
I don't suppose that. I think I always knew in my heart that I was good and I could work as well as, someone else in that role who had various other academic achievements. But I just pitched myself in a different way. So while I didn't have that academic background, I was very good at X, Y, and Z, and the other person who I was working with might have been good at something else. Yeah. So I think the imposter syndrome came on paper from when, I'd be at an event or something and I'd be introduced. I don't know when it would. It was just sort of a general feeling, and I think the feeling was more what other people were thinking, not like that I was particularly concerned about it. But I knew that once I worked with someone and I showed them what I could do, I wouldn't have that feeling. They wouldn't have that feeling. But certainly having that MA helped. Yeah. Definitely now in my role, I definitely wouldn't have been able to get the job that I've got now without that MA. Yeah. And I think, I don't know whether that's just a US thing, but you really have to, certainly in my role now, everyone that I work with has an MA. So I think certainly if I hadn't got that, I wouldn't be so whether or not I needed to get it, I don't know. But I think I needed it to open the door that I have done now. Yeah. Yeah. But I think you make a really great point. When you didn't have it, you were still able to pitch yourself in the way that made you just as a compelling candidate for a promotion, for example, but with a different, with practical skills rather than the certificate. Yeah. And I think that there are always ways to do that. I agree. Okay. But on paper, if I was applying on paper for a job, I might not have got it had I not had that MA. But because I'd been in the organisation a long time and worked my way up and had proven myself, it didn't matter. But, Yeah. Yeah. I'm really curious about the differences between the work in the UK versus the US. And I know it's not a completely seamless transition, but I'm just curious if there are, what would you say are the key similarities and differences between the two, locations? Well, it's funny because I had a US boss in the UK. So it's hard for me to answer that question because all my career has been working with people from the US. Yeah. So my boss in the UK was from the US, and obviously my boss now is in the US. So it's hard for me to answer that question because I don't know what it's like to work for a boss in the UK. I think the US has an attitude of let's get stuff done, and they don't suffer fools. So you have to really work hard, but you get rewarded in the US. So there's no coasting. You can't just, and I don't know whether that's the case in the UK. I think maybe it's more so like that in the UK, but in the US, I guess in the US they're at will employers, which means you can leave whenever you want, but they can sack you whenever they want. So tomorrow, you could be sacked in the US and you can't, that's that, you sign an agreement to say that that's what happens. So there's more an emphasis certainly on you got to work hard in this job. You can't rest on your laurels. And I suspect that's not really the same in the UK because you have more safeguards for, work. I suspect anyone listening to this is not someone that wants to just sort of sit around not really doing much. So maybe that doesn't apply. But certainly, those would be the differences. Another difference, of course, when you work for an organisation in the US, you get very little holiday compared to the UK. So if anyone's thinking of working in the US, that's something to certainly to consider. But the rewards are higher. So, bonuses, all that kind of stuff you regularly get, even in a non-profit in the US, and you certainly wouldn't get that in a non-profit in the UK.
Yeah. Oh, that's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing, Edith. Okay. And so then that takes you where you are today. You relocated to the US and moved into the role at the ICA. Is there anything else you'd want to share about that part of the journey with us?
I think it's very hard certainly I found it hard to work in a totally new country. People have misconceptions about you as a Brit, and expectations. And I did find it very hard initially when I started working here. But I really, the opportunity that the US allows, if you work hard, you get what you want, essentially, is the ethos or the philosophy of the US. And I really enjoy that philosophy. It's not about your accent. It's not about what school you went to. It's about how hard you work. And I think that's really, really important. And I hope the UK is more like that. Certainly when I was there, I didn't necessarily see that. It was more about, where you went to school and who your parents were, which I think is a bit unfortunate. But I think that, certainly for me in the US, it's been a bit of an eye opener. Actually, I enjoy working in the US, and I enjoy the attitude.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Edith. When you look back on this career journey that you've had, what would you call out as the high of the journey?
Well, I sort of live in the moment. So I'd say now is the high of the journey for me. I love what I do. As I said before, I love everyone I work with. I'm at a place in my life where I enjoy, managing people. I enjoy selecting things that I want to work really hard on. And I have that ability to do that now, which I really enjoy. So I think the high of my career path is now, and mainly because I just prefer to live in the moment. I don't believe in sort of looking back, because if my high was 10 years ago, then what's going to happen now? Then it's all just a downward spiral. But I've always sort of said, I'm always I think I'm sort of dismissive of what I do. Going back to your point in the beginning, what do friends and family think that I do for a job? I'm quite self-deprecating, so I would say the reason that my friends and family don't really know what I do for a job is because I don't really tell them, and I don't divulge information because I just don't particularly like talking about myself. But I think, if I were to really reflect on it, I think, I've really enjoyed my career path, and I've worked hard to get where I am today, and that's why I think I would say that I'm most proud of what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. When we look back at the career journey you've had, you've mentioned that imposter syndrome was, a limiting belief that you had to overcome. Is there anything else that stands out as a challenge of the journey?
I certainly think that was one of the main ones for me. That was difficult. and studying and working at the same time was obviously very hard as well.
Yeah.
But I've been very lucky in, how I've come to where I've been now, and I've worked hard to where I've been now. And aside from, the challenges of working hard and moving to a different country, there haven't been any specific standout challenges that I can think of.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. You mentioned your boss at the Princess Foundation, and I'd love you to talk about the role of role models and mentors, and the role that they've had in your success.
Yeah, I mean, my boss at the Princess Foundation was amazing. He was like a mentor. He was really encouraging. He was able to, and I know I was very lucky to have such a boss like this, but he was able to see where my talents were and was able to pick them out and put me in a position where I would thrive.
Yeah.
So I was very, very lucky to have that. And I think that's so important in a job, is to have someone that you like working for. Same now with my boss in the US. I mean, he's very different to my boss that I had in the UK. They're both from the US, but he's very different in other ways, but is equally as supportive of me and my work. And I think if you have someone like that, that's the key to being successful. And as much as I would like to say it's just on you to work really hard, which it is, you have to have that encouragement from the upper level so that you can achieve your full potential.
Yeah. I think that sometimes it just takes one person, doesn't it? Whether that's a boss or a peer or a teacher or somebody outside of, I don't know, your football coach, for example, to say, hey, you've got something there. I really think you should work on that. Have you thought about this? And it can just be that one conversation that can give you the confidence to try something new, and it ends up being the thing that you excel at. And I think you're really right there. It's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, had it not been for that boss that I had back in the UK, I probably wouldn't be where I am now, because he was able to see what I wasn't, ultimately. And he was able to nurture me and mentor me into a position where I could succeed.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. All right. So if we think about members in the audience who might be thinking, wow, that director of education pathway sounds like just what I'd be interested in doing. Are there any helpful or essential, I guess you've mentioned the MA, but are there any other helpful or essential educations or trainings that someone might need to think about getting?
You probably would need an undergraduate degree. So I think I don't necessarily that would need to be specific. So it could be any arts-based undergraduate, I think you have to be good with people, and that is pretty essential. Yeah. And then, so, the MA eventually, and that I did in education and international development, which was obviously a bit more on topic than my undergrad, which was African studies. Yeah. So I think that I think those are probably essential components of, what you would need to succeed. I didn't, my GCSEs and my A-levels, didn't get, I got reasonable grades, but I wasn't like top of the class. So you shouldn't be put off if you haven't got, top grades at, GCSEs or A-levels. But, you have to have a desire to work hard and go through the academic system, at least at undergrad level, and then, see where it takes you beyond that.
Yeah. Great. And you mentioned people skills there, and soft skills are are sometimes seen as less important than technical skills, for example. But, I believe they're they're absolutely critical. So, tell us about those people skills or softer skills that you feel, if, would be helpful for somebody thinking about pursuing this line of work.
Well, you have to be not afraid to speak to people, and not by people, I don't just mean people, I mean stakeholders. So you have to have the confidence to speak to everyone. And not only that, you have to be able to manage people. So I manage a team of people at the organisation, and there's a skill in being able to recognise their skills. And this is what I'm talking, that goes back to my mentor many, many years ago. Yeah. He recognised the skills in me, and that's what I hope I'm doing with the people at work in my team. I'm able to recognise their skills and promote them to positions which they will thrive in. I don't believe in. I really believe in recognising and promoting people to jobs that I know that they're going to succeed in, and that's what someone did for me, and that's what I want to do for others.
Yeah, paying it forward. So I'm hearing people skills as well as being able to have candid conversations, and being able to communicate with people, essentially internal and external stakeholders. And in your leadership role, getting to know your team, understand what makes them tick, trying to spot the talents that they might not have spotted in themselves yet, like your mentor did for you, and giving them opportunities and projects so that they can thrive there. Yeah, great. And I'm guessing it takes a huge amount of organizational muscle to be able to run all these projects, right?
Yeah, it does, but it also takes an ability to delegate tasks as well. So while I do a lot of the logistics and management, it's another skill to be able to delegate, to be able to recognise, so-and-so would be very good at doing this, let's give that them, but then giving them the room to manage it by themselves. So not interfering in what they're doing, because that's not, I really dislike that way of working if someone's above me telling me what to do. So giving them the space that they need to be able to run with, but, keeping a safe distance and making sure that nothing goes wrong, but giving them the space they need to be able to do the best that they can.
Yeah.
And
yeah. It's all about,
it's not just about management is also about taking difficult decisions. So, having difficult conversations with your colleagues if they're not performing, or if they're, finding it difficult, or if there's issues, then you have to have those difficult conversations. So not shying away from those as well. So that's also can be tricky.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. What does the future hold for this profession, would you say?
Like, is it going to go obsolete, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I hope not, but what would you see as the future? We've had the pandemic. There's so much technological advancement happening. I'm curious if you see that impacting the future of the sector or your work.
No. And the reason being is that education or educating people is not about training a robot to do it. And you always have to have that human contact, and you always have to be able to make decisions on the spot and do different things if you need to. So while I see that technology will aid or assist us in teaching or managing events or whatever it is we're doing, I don't see a future where my role doesn't exist, for example.
Good.
And if it does, never mind, I'll do something else.
For anybody who wants to find out more specifically about this career path, where would you point them, Edith?
That's a really good question, Jo. It's tricky because it doesn't. I imagine that's why you're doing this podcast, because there isn't any specific literature that I think you could probably point them towards two things: non-profit or charity management, that, or education administration. It's like a combination of both, so it's a slightly odd role in that sense. And it's not something you would see someone at school saying, I want to be a director of education for a non-profit, because it's a slightly weird hybrid role almost, because it combines lots of different things. But yeah, education administration is probably the closest you would get to someone who, was looking for more information about it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. As we move towards wrapping up, I'm curious, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were just starting out?
I think I wish I'd known that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. It's how hard you can work that is important. And I don't mean working so hard that you never get a break. I just mean it doesn't matter your background. If you work hard and you enjoy your job, you will succeed.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And what would you say to that school, college age person that just didn't know what to do? What would you say to her now?
I would like to say don't listen to the careers advisor, but I suspect, that was like 35 years ago that I went through that process, and I suspect careers advice has changed since then. But I would say try and do as much research or independent research as you can as to what kind of jobs are out there. And this podcast would be brilliant to help people figure out that you don't just have to be a teacher or a doctor. There are so many other professions that you can go into. So think about what it is that you enjoy, and think about doing some research as to where that could possibly take you. So I really enjoy being with people. And when you're younger, you might not see the fact that you're sociable as something you could apply to a job, but it does. Like I was sociable, and now I have a job that essentially is with people all the time. So I think, think about your strengths. Like, I really like playing computer games. Well, maybe I should be someone who works with computers or something like that, So, think about your strengths and what potentially that could mean. And you might think that that's not necessarily something you could get a job in, but it really is nowadays. There's so many, always, but certainly now there's so many different professions, so much going on that you could be really anything.
Yeah, great advice. Edith, do you have a favourite quote you could share with us, or a favourite expression that you find inspiring?
God, I should have researched this. Well, it's not really an expression, but I often think or advise myself to not get caught up with the gossip or the noise going on around me. Mm. So to focus on what I do and what I do best, and to not worry about what other people are saying or any other conflicts that are going on, because ultimately and honestly, everything usually resolves itself. So it's not really a piece of advice, or it's not something like a saying, but it's something I do tell myself often.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good advice. And, you know, in a world that is full of noise and chaos, you have to control the controllable. And often that's, you know, your actions, your response to things. And then you're doing your best.
That's right, Jo.
Edith, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been amazing. I've learnt a ton of things that I didn't know. And so I'm feeling inspired. So I know that the audience will be feeling inspired too. Do you have any final words of wisdom or encouragement you'd like to leave them with?
Believe in yourself.
A good note to
I think
end
that's
on.
what I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't ever think that you can't do what you want. Just believe in what you can do and follow your dreams. Unless your dreams are being a singer and you're not very good at singing, then probably don't do that.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much, Edith. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you gained any value out of today's episode, please help us spread the word by subscribing to the podcast. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, we would love your feedback. Please use the links in the show notes to get in touch. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.